I never realized how easily people forget the sound of your steps when you've stopped trying to be heard. The message came through at 11:42 a.m. I was wiping a coffee ring from the dining table with the sleeve of an old cardigan, one Harold never liked. Too stretched at the wrists, too faded at the collar. But it was soft, and it didn't ask for anything. "Grandma, are you not coming today? Everyone's here." Rachel always texted with that same tone, like she assumed I was already on the way. I had to read the line twice before it made sense. Coming where I opened my laptop, something Harold used to do for me when his fingers were still steady. The shared family calendar was there. We hadn't used it in a while, at least, not since he passed. I clicked through the dates. There it was. 100 days. Harold created by Linda. Set for 12:00 p.m. at their house. A catered lunch. Names stacked beneath the RSVP section, Linda's sisters, her father, Raymond's old boss, even the couple from 3 doors down. My name was not on the list. I refreshed the page. Maybe it hadn't loaded properly. I checked the spam folder in my inbox. Nothing. I clicked back again. Still nothing. The house was quiet except for the faint tick of the mantel clock, a sound I hadn't noticed in months. It used to irritate Harold when he was reading. Now it only reminded me I still lived here, even if just barely. I called Raymond's number. I wasn't sure what I would say, but I dialed anyway. The line connected, but it wasn't Raymond. "It's handled, Esther. You don't need to come." The voice was firm, controlled. Linda never hesitated. "I wasn't invited," I said, though it felt less like a question than an observation. "There was no need," she said. "Everything's been arranged. Rachel just got ahead of herself. It's a small gathering. I didn't know we were counting people now. We just thought, given how things are, it would be better this way." There was a pause, just long enough to hear the tap of her fingernail on glass. "Harold is gone. You need to accept that. This isn't your house anymore. It never really was. You should pack up and go." No raised voice. No cruelty in her tone. Just administrative finality like a loan denial or a closing notice. I didn't speak again. I ended the call and left the phone face down on the windowsill. For a while, I just stood there. The mug I'd been using all morning was still on the table, its tea long gone cold. The spoon inside had left a faint arc of tarnish near the bottom. Harold used to scold me for leaving utensils in hot cups. I used to say it gave the drink more character. He didn't laugh often, but he laughed at that. I walked to the study and opened the old filing cabinet. The drawer stuck as always. I had to tug it twice. Inside, everything looked as Harold had left it. Folders labeled in capital letters arranged by year. He liked things documented. "Property. Final," the tab read. The pages were neatly stacked untouched since his funeral. The house deed was there, but the ownership record had changed. Filed 3 weeks ago. Transferred in full to Raymond Whitcomb. My name didn't appear, not even as a co-signer. Attached was a printed email from a digital notary service. I recognized Raymond's signature at the bottom. He had typed his own name, clicked confirm, and closed the matter. I had not been notified. No call. No copy. I printed a fresh version of the document and folded it in half, then in thirds, and slid it under the ceramic coaster Harold had made in a community pottery class. It was uneven on one side and cracked slightly down the middle. He used to call it his abstract phase. I boiled water without thinking, dropped a tea bag into the same mug, sat down, held it for warmth. My hands looked more like my mother's than I remembered. Through the living room window, the dogwood tree had started to drop its petals. They scattered across the porch steps, white and pale pink, like crumpled paper. Harold used to sweep them every Saturday morning before breakfast. Said he liked the porch looking clean when the sun came through. I picked up the phone once more. The lock screen still showed the message from Rachel. I read it again. Grandma, are you not coming today? Everyone's here. Everyone. That word rang differently now. I turned the phone over and set it next to the document. The house was quiet again, except for the occasional creak of settling wood. I didn't open the refrigerator. I didn't look at the calendar pinned to the side with a magnet shaped like a red apple. I didn't check if Linda had sent anything else. Instead, I walked to the bedroom and opened Harold's closet. His shirts still hung where I'd left them. I took one off the hanger, light blue, frayed at the sleeves, and pressed it to my cheek. It didn't smell like him anymore, just cedar and thyme. I folded it carefully and placed it on the bed. Not because I was packing, just because I could. They hadn't shouted. They hadn't locked the door. They hadn't said I was worthless. They just stopped leaving space for me to stand. It wasn't just Harold they buried. It was my place, my name, my welcome. And none of them looked back. I used to think that if I took up less space, someone would finally make room for me. I brought the stew because I remembered Linda once mentioned rosemary helped with digestion. I spent the afternoon simmering it, careful not to oversalt. When I handed it to her, wrapped in a clean towel and still warm, she looked at the dish for a second too long. Mom, it's not gluten-free. Please don't bring that again. That was all. She didn't offer to keep it. She didn't open it. Just placed it on the side table like something forgotten on the sidewalk. I carried it back out to the car, placed it on the floor of the passenger seat, and rolled the windows down slightly. The car smelled of thyme the rest of the week. There was a time when I tried to be the fun grandmother. I brought bubble wands, little wooden puzzles, soft books with flaps. I crouched on their kitchen floor to tie Rachel's shoes, even when my knees made a quiet noise each time I bent. Raymond saw me unpacking a cloth bag full of crafts one afternoon and said, "Mom, don't overwhelm them." I put the bag away. They never asked what was in it. Harold once told me, "You don't have to win their affection, Esther. Just be present." So I stayed quiet during dinners, complimented the decor, asked polite questions about soccer games and preschool. But presence, it turns out, is not the same as invitation. I was there, but I was not wanted. Once I offered to plan Thanksgiving away from all of it neutral ground. A cabin, simple meals, no expectations. I booked flights. I called to confirm dietary notes. I even checked the weather. A week before the trip, Linda stepped into the hallway at Rachel's play and said, "We'll be with my mom. It's simpler." The confirmation email was never opened. When Harold started forgetting numbers, he handed the accounts over to Raymond. "Just until I feel sharper," he said. Raymond came over with a folder and a stylus and sat at the kitchen table as Harold signed each page. "It'll take something off your plate, Dad." I didn't say anything. I wanted to. I looked at the ring mark Harold's mug had left on the table and traced it with my finger, but I didn't speak. Afterward, the bank statements no longer came to the house. I once asked about the balance in the savings account just in passing. Raymond looked up from his phone. "You don't need to worry about that anymore." I tried to believe he meant well. For Linda's birthday, I sewed a wraparound apron in soft blue. I remembered her mentioning that she always got cold around the waist when cooking. I wrapped it neatly, included a handwritten note about the fabric being machine washable. At the party, she opened it in front of her friends, gave a tight smile, and placed it back in the box. "Oh, handmade," she said. "That's thoughtful." I never saw it again. One evening, I stayed after dinner to help clean. I liked wiping counters when no one was talking. It gave me something to do with my hands. I heard them in the living room. "She hovers," Linda said. "It's like she's waiting for a gold star. She's trying." Raymond said. But it's not relaxing. That night I left without saying goodbye. At Christmas, I bought a thick sweater for Raymond. Navy wool, hand-stitched buttons, something his father would have worn proudly. I found it 6 months later at the back of their hallway closet, still in the gift bag, tags intact. I didn't ask about it. When Rachel got a part in the school choir, I offered to pick her up and take her to practice. "We've got it covered," Linda told me. "Too many transitions confuse her." So I stayed home. I ironed Harold's old shirts for no one in particular. I baked bread I didn't eat. I planted tulips by the kitchen window. They bloomed and no one noticed. I once asked if I could bring a dish to Sunday lunch. Linda sent a message, "No need, everything is catered now." On my birthday, I left a voicemail on Raymond's phone. He texted back 12 hours later. Hope it was a good one, no punctuation. I spent that evening reorganizing the spice rack even though I no longer cooked for anyone else. During one of their visits, I reached to pour water for Mason. Linda watched my hand and said, "Your rings keep catching on things. Maybe it's time to take them off." I took them off that night. I placed them in the porcelain tray on the nightstand. They left a faint circle of skin behind. The last time I brought them a pie, it came back untouched. "We're off sugar this month," Raymond said. "Doctor's orders." I nodded, folded the foil back over it, and left it on my own counter at home. I didn't need it either. There was always something too much noise, too little planning, too strong a scent, too awkward a gift. I adapted. I made space. I took up less air. I replaced real questions with light ones. I offered myself in easy-to-carry pieces. Linda once pulled me aside during a cookout. She handed me a folded napkin. "There's something in your teeth," she said. "Maybe check before more people notice." I folded the napkin and held it in my lap. Not once did I raise my voice. I never asked for more than a chair, a clean plate, a returned call. I never expected a parade, only a place. But even in silence, you can be too much. I made myself smaller, quieter, easier to fold away. And I thought that would be enough. I used to believe memory was something earned. The cake had 3 layers, lemon, poppy seed, and cream. I'd made the same one on our 25th anniversary, when Harold still stood behind me in the kitchen and stole slices before it was cut. For the 40th, Linda ordered from a bakery. There were gold ribbons and floating balloons and a slideshow of old pictures, most of them grainy, a few I didn't recognize. I was seated at the end of the table, 2 chairs away from Harold, beside a woman from Linda's office who kept checking her watch. Raymond stood up for a toast. Dad's been the rock of this family, the one who worked, who carried everything through hard times. I watched the condensation roll down my glass. No mention of the lunches packed, the coupons, clipped the nights spent pressing seams for Raymond's school uniforms. I clinked my glass gently, and the sound was swallowed by the chatter. Rachel once sent a birthday card. It had glittery birds and a pink envelope. I opened it carefully, saving the sticker seal like I always did. Inside it read, "Love, Rachel and Daddy." No mention of me. I thought maybe the signature had been rushed. Maybe there had been a second card. I checked the envelope again, turned it over in my hands. The paper smelled faintly of cinnamon, or maybe that was the drawer I stored it in. When I was featured in the town paper for donating to the children's wing at the hospital, I brought a copy over folded neatly. Linda glanced at the photo. "Well, let's not make this about you." I slid the paper back into my purse. That night when Harold asked how the visit went, I told him about the casserole Linda had made. I left out the rest. There was a scarf I made from thick gray yarn. I'd bought the skein at a market in Vermont years ago, saved it because the weight felt just right. I knitted it slowly, stitch by stitch, through a winter Harold kept the thermostat low. I wrapped it in tissue and tied it with twine. At Christmas, Linda unwrapped it, smiled faintly, and tucked it into the pile behind her. Later, while picking up cups and napkins, I saw it still there in the gift bag, unopened underneath an empty bottle of wine. I took it home. I wore it once to the grocery store. Once, I submitted a family recipe to the church cookbook. My mother's cinnamon biscuits. I wrote it out by hand, careful with the measurements. When the book was printed, the note beside it read, "Submitted by Linda Whitcomb, daughter-in-law of Harold Whitcomb." Not mine. No one corrected it. I didn't ask. Raymond started calling less after Harold fell ill. I texted updates. He responded with emojis. Once I asked if he wanted me to share some of Harold's old Navy memorabilia with Mason for a school project. We're trying not to push military stuff right now. I boxed it back up. The smell of old leather stayed on my hands. There was a time Rachel asked for help with a family tree assignment. I started telling her about my grandmother, how she crossed the country on a wagon, taught herself to read late in life. Rachel wrote down the details, nodding. Later, Raymond told me, "Let's keep things current. She doesn't need all that old world stuff." The project listed Harold's side. Mine was left blank. During one summer barbecue, I offered to bring lemonade. Linda waved her hand. "We've got the drinks covered." She handed me a stack of plastic forks. There was no water on the table, and someone spilled soda on the deck. I used my scarf to blot it up. No one noticed. I wore a dress to Rachel's piano recital. Pale blue with a soft collar, something I'd sewn for Easter one year. I arrived early and sat near the front. Raymond came over, leaned in. "Maybe stay in the back next time?" She gets nervous if she sees too many faces she's not expecting. I nodded. I moved to the second row. When she finished her piece, she glanced out at the crowd and smiled. At Linda. "I remember Raymond's birthday one year." I made a photo album, printed pictures from childhood, added notes, tiny memories under each one. "You loved blue bikes," or "This was your first camping trip." I placed it in a brown envelope wrapped with navy ribbon. He thanked me, then passed it to Linda without opening it. When I returned a month later, I saw it on the shelf above the coat rack, still sealed. During Harold's final hospital stay, I brought an Afghan. He liked it over his legs, even in summer. After he passed, I came to pick it up. The nurse handed me a bag. "He wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was a book of crossword puzzles and a folded grocery list. No Afghan. Raymond told me later. We donated most of his things already. He wouldn't have wanted clutter. I didn't ask what was taken. I already knew. Once during a cold afternoon, I visited their house just to drop off mail that had arrived at the old address. Linda opened the door and looked past me. "Oh, we thought you were the delivery person. She didn't invite me in." I handed over the envelope and walked back to the car. There were birthdays, missed holidays, abbreviated messages answered, late invitations phrased like afterthoughts. But none of it ever came with shouting. Only the quiet erosion of presence. You don't always lose someone all at once. Sometimes they erase you in lowercase letters. I used to think the silence in a house meant peace. I was folding a towel slow, and even when I heard voices downstairs, heavy shoes, a second pair of steps that didn't belong. They moved like people who knew where they were going. One of them laughed not loudly, but the way people do when they're comfortable in a place. A soft click of a measuring tape. Someone opened a cabinet. I waited. Raymond's voice drifted up through the air vent. "It's just a contractor. We're planning a few updates." I didn't remember being asked. In the hallway, I passed a stranger with a clipboard. He smiled at me like a hotel guest would to staff. The man was tracing the crown molding in the dining room with one finger, like he was already imagining his changes. No one explained anything else. Later that day, I noticed the door to Harold's study wasn't fully closed. He used to keep it locked, even when his memory started slipping. I stepped inside. The air still held the faintest trace of tobacco and wool. His desk had been open drawers partly pulled, the old filing box unlatched. Papers were scattered across the bed like fallen leaves. I sat down on the edge and picked up one sheet at a time. Receipts, faded tax returns, a picture of Harold in his uniform, a small envelope labeled Trust. Inside was a photocopy of a document I'd never seen before. The family business. The company I thought had been sold years ago. The one Harold always said he let go of because it was time. But the document said otherwise. The business still existed, folded into a trust. My name was listed, under beneficiary. Not Raymond's, not Linda's, not the family. I placed the papers back the way I found them, except for the envelope. That I folded and kept inside my worn cookbook. Page 217. Banana bread with nutmeg. No one ever bakes from it anymore. That weekend, they invited me to dinner. The table was already set when I arrived. Linda was wearing a silk scarf, pale gray hair pinned back neatly. The air smelled of grilled fish and cold lemon slices. Raymond poured water into stemless glasses. Mason sat with his tablet headphones in. I served the salad quiet. No one made eye contact. Linda placed her fork down mid-chew and reached for the salt. "You're holding on to things that aren't yours anymore." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look up. "He left them for the family. That doesn't mean you." I remember looking down at the plate. The fish had already started to flake apart. My napkin was still folded in my lap. I hadn't used it once. I stood up slowly without a sound. Raymond reached for his wine. "She's just tired," he murmured to no one. I took my coat, the old beige one with the lining that had come undone at the sleeve. No one followed me to the door. No one asked if I'd be all right getting home. The next morning, I found a text message from Raymond. "Don't take things personally. She's just stressed." The message didn't end with a question. It didn't ask how I was. I didn't reply. That afternoon, I walked into the living room and noticed a small red sticker on the underside of the bookshelf, a code. Contractors use them for staging. I peeled it off and pressed it flat between two receipts in my drawer. A few days later, I received a forwarded email about a financial review. My name was misspelled in the subject line. The body read, "Since Esther is still on the paperwork, we'll need her consent at least on file. Doesn't have to be active." That was all. No salutation, no explanation, just a technicality to clear. I placed my tea mug on the counter and noticed the ring it left faint brown, perfect. I left it there. In the hallway closet, boxes were missing. My winter scarf, the green wool blanket, the ceramic angel from the top of last year's tree. No note, no mention. Linda later walked by me with a clipboard. "We're simplifying the space. You'll thank us later." She smiled like someone who believes what she's done is generous. I asked where she put Harold's record player. "Oh," she said, "we donated that. It was dated." I remembered Harold lifting that same player out of its box with both hands, his fingers brushing the lid like it might bruise. The vinyl sleeves were still in the hallway. No one wanted those. They walked through the house like I'd already been moved out. Every room touched, every cabinet adjusted. They changed the lighting, the handles, the arrangement of cushions. I was still there, but I had become part of the backdrop. One afternoon, while taking the trash out, I noticed a folded brochure wedged near the mailbox, "Estate Planning for Legacy Families." No address, no return contact. I brought it inside, laid it next to the grocery list on the fridge, and didn't touch either. Linda later asked if I'd signed the papers she'd left on the side table. I hadn't seen any. "It's fine," she said. "I'll just sign them in your name." There was no pause after the sentence. No moment of humor. They thought I would keep nodding, keep serving dinner, while they carved away the bones of my life. But I was beginning to notice what had been taken. and what still remained. I never liked the sound of my own voice when it echoed back at me unanswered. That morning, I placed Harold's old fountain pen beside the folder. The ink had dried long ago, but the cap still clicked shut with that soft finality. I didn't take much, just the folder with the trust documents and the silent agreement I had finally made with myself. Clara Densmore still kept her office warm. There was always something cinnamon-scented in the air, as if her clients needed comfort more than clarity. She didn't greet me with hugs or sympathy. She gestured to the chair across from her, and I sat. Her fingers moved across the documents, like someone reading a familiar recipe. She pointed without looking up. This trust was signed and filed 6 years ago. It's airtight. You're the sole beneficiary, Esther. She flipped to the next page. These are Raymond's loan requests, all official, all unpaid. She didn't offer an opinion, and I didn't ask for one. The numbers were clean and cruel. He wanted to make sure you wouldn't need to ask permission, she said, almost as if to herself. That's what Harold told me. I nodded. I left the folder open on her desk for a moment longer, just to feel the weight of it outside my hands. When I returned to the house, I didn't walk through the front. I used the side entrance near the garage. That way I didn't have to cross the living room or hear the sound of the television echoing someone else's story. I didn't want mine compared. In Harold's room, the air still carried his cologne, just a whisper caught in the curtains. I pulled the door closed behind me and sat in the chair beside the dresser, where his glasses still rested, one arm bent just slightly. Linda knocked once before cracking the door open. "We didn't see you at dinner." I didn't answer. "We'll be rearranging the upstairs next week. Might want to go through your things before then." She didn't wait for a response, just turned and left the door half open, as if the room no longer belonged to me in full. I reached for the drawer where Harold kept the small things he never wanted: misplaced paper clips, cufflinks, old receipts, folded twice. His wedding band rested there now. I picked it up and placed it in my palm. It was heavier than I remembered. That night I ate crackers from a tin in Harold's room. I didn't light the overhead. I didn't turn on the news. The next morning, I called Edgar Hollowell. "I'd like to understand my legal standing," I said. "Fully." He didn't ask for more. Later that week, Linda stopped me on the stairs. "You know, the sooner we settle things, the easier it'll be on everyone." I looked past her at the wall. A photo hung there our wedding day, crooked frame, dust on the glass. No one had noticed. "I mean, we're trying to be reasonable, but you're making things drawn out. Drawn out." As if time was something I had stretched unfairly. She waited, expecting me to react. I didn't. Downstairs, Raymond had left the mail on the kitchen counter again. I sorted it quietly. 2 letters addressed to me had been opened already. I didn't mention it. That afternoon, I folded my cardigans into 2 piles, one for donation, one to keep. I didn't count them. I didn't explain. I wrote 3 names in a notebook and placed it in my purse: Clara, Edgar, a locksmith. That evening, Linda made baked chicken. I smelled the rosemary through the vents. No one knocked on my door. The next morning, I walked past Raymond as he typed at the kitchen island. He didn't look up. "I'll need the keys back soon," he said. "We've got new locks coming." I paused by the sink. The coffee pot was still half full. I poured a cup, held it, and said nothing. He glanced at me. "This is hard for everyone, Mom. You're not the only one going through something." I stirred the coffee once and watched the ripple settle. "You should have been clearer about what you wanted. You never said no." That part stayed with me, how quiet they expected me to be, and then blamed me for it. I placed the cup in the sink untouched. That night, I didn't turn down the bed. I lay on top of the quilt in my daytime clothes and stared at the ceiling for a while. The ticking of the old clock in the hall had grown louder, or maybe I had grown still enough to finally hear it. No final argument, no slammed door. No apology requested or offered. I rose before sunrise, packed 3 bags, left the photos in their frames, left the key on the counter next to the pen Harold hadn't touched in years. No letter, no note, no scene, just the click of the side door behind me. I didn't slam the door. I simply stopped standing in its frame. I didn't leave anything behind that wouldn't have been swept away without me. The house emptied itself the moment I stopped filling its corners. No packing list, no boxes labeled by room, only what fit in the back seat and a manila folder wedged under my arm. The keys I left on the hook right beneath the frame with Harold's Academy photo, the one Linda used to tilt slightly each time she dusted, as if the man in it leaned too much toward me. The cabin smelled like old pine and unwashed books. A narrow stove sat where a fireplace might have been, and the mattress creaked like it had a memory. I opened all the windows before I unpacked anything. It wasn't the air I needed, it was the noise of trees not talking. Raymond's message came the next morning. Just text, no punctuation. Let us know once you're settled. We'll need access to the house for some renovations. I didn't reply. I folded the phone shut and pushed it into the drawer beside a chipped ceramic mug and 2 dull pencils. A kind of stillness arrived after that. Not peace, not relief, just a silence I didn't have to explain. By the second morning, I made breakfast on 1 burner, 2 eggs over done toast. I ate standing up. Not out of habit, but because there was no one to ask if I was almost done. I drank tea from the mug with the chip and set the spoon on the sill. It left a mark. I didn't wipe it. I laid out Clara's papers on the narrow table under the window, each page flattened by hand. Property transfers, trust documents. Raymond's unpaid loan agreements all signed in ink, I recognized. Harold's slant had changed in his last years, the loops less generous, but it was still him. Still the man who had once scribbled my name into a snow globe card before birthdays became group texts. I kept the documents in order. Colored tabs, staples pressed firm. I reread the terms of the trust. I made notes in the margins. I called Edgar Hollowell's office and scheduled a quiet appointment. No one called to ask how I was. The rug curled slightly at one edge where the floor dipped. I stepped over it each time I crossed to the kitchenette. Not once did I trip. Not once did I hear a voice saying, "Why do you always do it that way?" One afternoon, I found a rusted tin box tucked behind the water heater. It held receipts from a general store and a brittle photo of a dog. Nothing of value, but I didn't throw it away. I set it on the shelf above the sink. Sometimes things don't need to be useful to stay. The evenings stretched long. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't light candles. I let the dark come in and take shape. I read through the contract revisions Edgar sent by mail. I drank tea without sweetener. The sugar jar sat untouched. I liked watching it stay full. The first envelope I opened had Harold's initials embossed on the flap, a remnant. Inside, Edgar's note. You are the sole controlling party, effective immediately. All decisions from here on rest entirely with you. I underlined that sentence. I didn't need to, but I wanted to touch the words. Linda sent an email the following week. Subject line clarification needed. The message, per previous discussions, we'd appreciate your guidance on how to proceed with the house. Contractor is awaiting access. I read it once, then once more, then deleted it. No reply. Not out of spite, not from fear, just because not everything warrants a response. I bought groceries from a co-op run by students. One called me ma'am and asked if I needed help carrying a paper bag. I declined not to assert independence, but because the bag wasn't heavy. Each morning, I swept the front step. Not because it needed it, but because I liked the sound. A soft scrape against wood. No one timed me. No one corrected the direction of the broom. I hung Harold's old cardigan on the back of the chair. It smelled faintly of cedar. The cuffs were worn. I didn't put it on. I didn't fold it away. It just sat there, as if it might someday be reached for by someone who remembered its weight. I opened a new account at the local bank. The clerk glanced at my file and said, "You've got more in assets than most of our clients." I looked at the pen in my hand. "That doesn't change how I buy eggs," I replied. The cabin had no clock. I checked time by the way the light shifted on the floorboards. Late morning was gold. Early evening like pewter. I began to know things without numbers. When the lawyer called to confirm the filing was complete, I let it go to voicemail. I played the message, once saved it, then listened again a day later. "You have full discretion now, Esther. No further permissions required." I didn't delete it. I started keeping a journal, not for reflection, but for record. Simple things: bought tea, swept porch, reread trust document. I wrote in block letters. No loops. One evening, a squirrel ran across the windowsill, startling a ceramic owl I'd found at a thrift store. It fell and cracked. I didn't fix it. I moved it to the side so it still looked out just slightly off-center. I received a letter postmarked from my old neighborhood. No return address. Inside, a printed photo of the front yard now dug up. A note below it. "New garden layout approved." No signature, just the image of soil torn and rearranged. I folded it in half and dropped it into the tin box behind the heater. I didn't tell anyone where I lived. I didn't update my address on the family group calendar. I didn't give them the chance to ask what I needed, because I didn't. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I could begin without asking anyone. Maybe distance doesn't always make people realize what they lost. Sometimes it just reminds them of what they no longer have access to. The first call came on a Thursday. I recognized the number, but let it ring until it stopped. No voicemail. A few minutes later, the text arrived. "Hi, Mom. How's the new place? Linda says we should all catch up soon." It didn't mention the time I left or the door. They never opened as I walked out. No questions about the boxes I carried alone, the address they never asked for. Only the same clipped tone I'd learned to recognize pleasantries before a transaction. Another message followed just 2 minutes later. "There's just one thing. We may need to access some of Dad's financial records for estate purposes." The phrasing landed soft, like a polite knock, except it wasn't a question. It was a preparation for an expectation. I didn't reply. I printed both messages, slipped them into a clear sheet protector, and slid it behind a tab I labeled, "Not about me." Later that afternoon, a new email came from an address I didn't recognize. A lawyer I'd never met copied with another unfamiliar name. The subject line read, "Trust Documentation Review, Estate Equitability Concerns." I read it twice then, a third time. Phrases like potential reassessment, concerned beneficiaries, and in the spirit of fairness stacked on top of one another, like a tower made to look neutral, but lean just enough to tip. Not one mention of Harold's wishes. Not one line that acknowledged he had set things in order himself years ago. I didn't respond. I printed the email, hole-punched it, and slid it behind the same tab. The phone stayed quiet for 3 days. Then a message from a niece I hadn't heard from since her high school graduation. "Hi, Aunt Esther. I hope you're doing okay. I heard you moved. Uncle Ray said you have some legal stuff we all need to talk about. Maybe we can grab lunch." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I folded a towel in half, then again placing it on the back of the chair. The one I used to sit in while helping Harold fill out tax forms in early spring. His handwriting had grown thin in the last few years, and I had been the one to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. I still had the envelope from his last filing. The flap torn neatly, the inside lined with his notes in blue pen. "You're better at reading the small print than I ever was." That's what he used to say. handing me forms with a paperclip and a smile that pulled more to one side than the other. I never thought much of it until now. They weren't reaching for me. They were reaching for the documents I held. Not once had anyone asked how I slept in a new bed. Not once had they wondered whether the winter came colder up by the ridge or whether the market near the cabin still carried the lemon yogurt Harold liked. They wanted what my presence once contained without inviting the presence itself. A second email from the same lawyer followed. We understand you may be experiencing a difficult time. Our goal is simply to ensure clarity and equitable access for all family members to the information regarding the trust. I printed that one too. No greeting, no closing, only the weightless word clarity used like a crowbar. The pile in the Not About Me folder grew. I didn't count the pages. I just kept sliding them in one by one, as if each were a shell dropped by someone who once knocked but never waited at the door. No one asked what Harold had left me for. No one asked why he signed the papers that way in that month with that particular witness present. No one thought that maybe he had done it because he saw what I didn't want to say. At the bottom of the cabinet, I found the notepad we used to keep in the kitchen drawer. The one for grocery lists and reminders like pick up dry cleaning or call June about Sunday dinner. I flipped it open. The last line, written in Harold's handwriting, Clara still handles the filings. She's the only one I trust with details. I traced the words with my fingertip. The letters were smaller than they used to be. I refilled my tea and didn't check the phone. When the call came through the next morning, I let it ring. Then again that night and once the day after. Always a different name on the screen. One message ended with, "You know, none of this was personal. It's just about doing the right thing now." I underlined that sentence and filed it last. I took a sheet of lined paper from the drawer, wrote one sentence in ink, and folded it in half. They didn't come looking for me. They came looking for what I could no longer be convinced to give. I didn't place it in the binder. I left it on top. Because some truths don't belong in folders. Some truths are too quiet to file away. And some calls are best met with silence, the kind that doesn't mean defeat, but recognition. They didn't miss me. They missed what I carried. I don't count the days anymore. I mark them by the way the kettle sings. The kettle is new, matte white with a brass handle that warms gradually as the water boils. I found it on a clearance shelf, still in its box, with a small dent on the side. I pressed the dent gently, not to fix it, just to understand it. It stays as it is. I suppose I do too. At the library, I file returns and shelve new titles alphabetically. The community bulletin board has curled edges, and someone tapes up flyers without trimming them. I smooth each one with the side of my hand. One afternoon, a man in his 80s asked how to print a recipe from his email. I watched his fingers tremble over the keyboard. "Take your time," I said without saying it. I walk home without music. The trees do not lean in or part for me, but they do not ask anything either. The electric bill came in a pale green envelope. I wrote the check in blue ink and placed it on the windowsill until I remembered to mail it. I wrote my own name on the return address line. I didn't pause. There is a tin of sugar cookies on the counter. Not because of a holiday. Not because someone visited. I bought them for myself and placed them in a tin I used to use when hosting tea with Harold's partners. The lid clicks into place now without ceremony. I keep the folder from Clara on my desk. The edges are crisp. Each tab is labeled. I don't look through it often, but I rest my hand on it now and then, as if checking it hasn't vanished. Joyce Stratton knocked on my door last Sunday. I didn't pretend not to hear. She wore a long scarf with books printed on it. "Thought you might like this," she said, handing me a pie that smelled of cinnamon and apology. She didn't ask why I was here alone. There's a reading group at the church basement. We don't judge books or people. I told her I'd think about it. She nodded like someone who knew what silence could mean. The cardigan was folded under a bundle of scarves in my old suitcase. I recognized it before I saw the sleeves faded sage with a loose thread near the cuff. Linda once glanced at it and said, "It looks like something from a church rummage bin." I didn't respond then. I folded it smaller that day, as if it would disappear. I wore it to the bookstore on Main Street. I didn't avoid mirrors. There was a boy helping restock the shelves. He wore earbuds and nodded to me without looking up. I reached for a used paperback on a table labeled Memoir and found a receipt tucked inside. It wasn't mine, but I kept it. Someone else once bought gum and a single stamp. At the checkout, the clerk pointed at my cardigan. "I like the buttons," she said. "Just that." I nodded. The house where I used to live is still listed under Harold's trust. I check records sometimes, not because I'm unsure, but because I can. The legal terms are dry and impersonal, but one line remains: beneficiary Esther Whitlow. I don't print it out anymore. I don't need to. I drink tea in the morning always from the same mug. It has a chip on the rim that touches my lip if I'm not careful. I never turn the mug, I just adjust. Raymond hasn't called again. A check-in text came from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, just making sure you're okay. Let me know if you need anything. R." I filed it under a folder in my phone labeled Documentation. I didn't respond. At the library, a teenager handed me back a book I recommended the week before. "It wasn't boring," she said. Then she walked away. I made a note in the logbook. Teen reads literary fiction voluntarily. I smiled without moving my face. The grocery clerk asked if I needed help with my bags. I told him I was fine. I carried them all in one trip. When I unlock my door at night, I don't flick the light switch right away. I let the dimness settle first, then move slowly. No one notices the sound of my footsteps, and no one tells me to take them softer. There's a photograph of Harold on the bookshelf. He's standing in front of his father's barn holding a rake looking 20. The frame is silver, slightly tarnished. I haven't moved it, but I no longer dust it every week. I once told a friend I didn't mind being behind the scenes. "I like being useful," I said. What I meant was I thought usefulness would keep me from being forgotten. The mail comes at noon. I recognize the sound of the hinge on the mailbox before the envelope falls. Some days it's a flyer. Some days it's a bill. Some days nothing at all. Still, I check. I write lists on yellow notepads. Not things to buy, just things I understand now. This week's list includes: steep tea longer. Don't rewash clean dishes. Read past page 50. Leave the porch light off unless needed. My hands don't tremble when I sign my name anymore. I don't double-check the spelling. I don't pause at the W. At the bottom of the closet, I found a pair of heels I wore once to Raymond's engagement party. They pinched, but I kept them anyway. I slipped them on and walked across the hardwood floor once just to hear the sound. Then I placed them back, not for memory, but because I wasn't ready to throw them away. I received promotional mailers addressed to current resident. I opened them anyway. Not because I'm interested, but because I live here. That counts. I haven't written a will yet. Not because I don't intend to, but because I no longer feel rushed. When I do, I'll use the blue ink again. I'll sign in one stroke. I used to wait for permission. Now I just place my hand on the doorknob and turn. I no longer reread things twice. I used to, especially when the paper felt important, or the name at the top was mine. But that morning, I unfolded the documents and signed where I needed to, without delay or doubt. My coat stayed on the whole time. I didn't mention why. The lining had thinned with age, but the weight still grounded me. Edgar placed the contracts in front of me in silence. No greetings, no unnecessary questions. The first file was Raymond's debt. I glanced once at his signature in the same rushed loops he used on birthday cards and mortgage applications. The ink had smudged slightly near the date. I didn't point it out. I didn't need to. I had requested only one additional clause stating that repayment would proceed automatically through payroll deductions if necessary. Quiet enforcement, no confrontation, just ink and consequences. The second file bore the name of the company, once our families, then mine alone, and now ready to belong to someone who had never asked for it. Leonard's name was printed in clean font on the top line. I traced it with my finger once, then nodded. "The quarterly profit share will still come to your account," Edgar said, not looking up. "No branding, no board seat. Just numbers in a ledger. That's all I want." I initialed the bottom of the page using my maiden name. It had been decades, but my hand still remembered how the loops curved. It felt like returning to something that had waited for me quietly in a drawer somewhere. I had already prepared the letter. It was printed in size 12 font on plain white paper. No salutation, no farewell. Only one sentence: "I've retained what is mine and returned what never truly was. All further contact may be directed through counsel." The rest of the page was empty. I slid it into a cream envelope and sealed it with one press of my thumb. The flap held with a soft, dry sound. I took it to the post office myself, not for ritual, but for certainty. I handed it to the clerk. She didn't ask what it was, and I didn't explain. Outside, I crossed the street, slowly letting a truck pass before I stepped off the curb. The air smelled faintly of rust and dry leaves. I walked into a consignment store I'd never noticed before. On a small wooden tray sat a dozen old house keys, none labeled. One had a pink thread tied to the handle. I turned it over in my palm, then put it back. At home, I took out the red vinyl folder with the family registry inside. The corners had curled over time, and the front cover bore a faint ring where someone once set a coffee cup. I turned to the page where my name appeared third in the list, after Harold and beside Raymond. The ink had dulled to brown like it belonged to a different century. I slid the page out slowly and folded it in thirds. In a second envelope, I placed the sheet along with a blank slip of white paper. No message. No explanation. I addressed it to the old house, though I didn't know who'd receive it now. Maybe no one. When the postal clerk took it, she looked at me briefly. I nodded. That was enough. Back at the cabin, I didn't turn on the light. The kettle had cooled, but I reheated it and left the lid open so the steam could rise freely. I let the tea oversteep. It turned the color of tree bark. I sat without touching it. That night, I opened my wallet and removed the card with the family crest, stitched leather embossed initials, some motto in Latin I never learned to pronounce. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. I placed it in the drawer beside the spare batteries and old keys. The next morning, I rearranged the bookshelf alphabetically. I folded the towels differently. I unrolled the rug and stood at its edge just to see if the corner stayed flat. I didn't check my phone. Later, I put on the cardigan I hadn't worn in years. The elbows had softened the buttons a little loose. I wore it out to the bakery. No one noticed. I liked that. A woman behind the counter asked, "You new to the area?" I nodded. "Just a few months." "Well, welcome," she said, sliding a paper bag across the counter. The warmth of the bread reached through the bag. I carried it home like something worth keeping whole. In the evening, I folded the day's receipts into a narrow envelope labeled Q1. My handwriting looked firmer than I remembered. I lined up the rest of the envelopes by month, not for anyone else to read, just so I'd know what came from where. I poured the tea into a glass jar and placed it in the fridge. I didn't label it. When I opened the drawer later to get a pen, I saw the nameplate from my wallet beside the old card. I turned it over. No scratches. just a reflection too faint to catch my own face. I closed the drawer. I didn't keep a copy of the letter I sent Raymond. I didn't need to. The sentence lived clearly enough in my mind, sharper than most memories. That night I lit a candle but didn't stay to watch it burn. I left it on the kitchen table and sat on the porch where the wind could move without needing permission. I didn't slam the door. I just erased my name from it. I used to wait for the sound of someone else's footsteps before I moved. The water in the white porcelain kettle rattled as it boiled its whistle, soft and deliberate. I'd kept it tucked away for years, too fragile, too easy to crack, too pretty to risk. Now I used it every morning. The handle had started to show faint lines of wear where my fingers curled, like a memory being written quietly in reverse. The envelope on the corner of the table was still sealed. I'd moved it twice already, once to make space for my mug, once to dust beneath it. The handwriting on the front, deliberate and round, belonged to Bethany. I didn't need to read it. I'd already heard her voice months ago on speakerphone. She was just holding it all for him. That's what wives do. They hold things. I picked up the envelope again, turned it over, and set it under a stack of library receipts. Not to hide it, just to stop seeing it. The fern in the corner had started to reach beyond the pot's edge. When I brought it here, it was almost gone. The stems were limp, the soil gray. It had spent too long in a garage without windows. I hadn't spoken to it, but I'd rotated it toward the sun, watered the roots with cooled tea leaves, moved it inside on nights that dropped below freezing. Now it was quietly alive, not because someone expected it to be, but because it had the chance to be. At the library, I'd helped an older man find a book on antique farm tools. He'd called me Miss, then immediately apologized. I hadn't corrected him. He had left a single plum on my desk in a folded napkin before he walked out. I put it in my coat pocket. I still hadn't eaten it. I wasn't sure if I was saving it or forgetting it. Joyce had invited me again. She mentioned that the book club was starting something new, short stories this time. No one has the energy for long novels anymore, she said, handing me a folded flyer with a smudge of banana bread on the corner. I placed it under the sugar bowl beside the stove. I hadn't decided yet. While reorganizing the shelf beneath the window, I found a tin box I hadn't opened since moving. Inside were buttons from coats I no longer owned, an old whistle from the schoolyard, and one of Harold's cufflinks, just one, no pair. The metal had dulled, but the W was still carved in small and smug. I always said she wasn't the business type. Harold just needed someone to keep the house going. That had been my sister-in-law's voice at a dinner long ago, passed down the table like a threadbare napkin no one claimed. I closed the box. The scarf I was knitting had grown lopsided. The yarn looped tighter on one side, looser on the other. I didn't start over. I didn't fix it. It was the first thing I'd made that wasn't meant for anyone's approval. I placed it gently over the back of the wooden chair and let the needles rest. Outside, the air smelled like salt, and something faintly metallic, old pier nails, maybe. A gull landed near the cabin step and didn't fly off when I stood. We watched each other for a moment. I didn't wave. It didn't cry out. I checked the electricity bill, paid. The library's small stipend arrived on time. I bought flour and fresh mint and a notepad with thick paper and no lines. I wrote down 3 things that didn't need an answer. The weight of silence is different when no one is waiting to break it. Some repairs are invisible until they stop creaking. People call it solitude when they're afraid of being alone. Raymond hadn't written. Not directly. But Leonard forwarded an email. She's being unreasonable. This could have all been handled quietly. That word again. Quietly. As if my whole life hadn't been a practice in stillness. Not speaking at the dinner table until spoken to. Not correcting mistaken assumptions. Not naming what was mine. I suppose she thinks she deserves more just because he put her name on some paper. That one had come from Bethany at a 4th of July barbecue. She'd been slicing peaches. I'd been holding her son's juice box while he tried to tie his shoe. She hadn't looked up when she said it. I folded the email and slid it beneath the unused placemat. The paper made a neat sound against the wood. The sun moved across the floor like something being drawn slowly with a brush. I traced it with my eyes, not chasing, not naming, just watching. When I opened the drawer beside the bed, I found the family record book. My name was still written in blue ink beside Harold's, beside Raymond's birth date. I closed it again and returned it to the drawer. I didn't rip the page. I didn't cross anything out. I just didn't need to look at it anymore. The envelope stayed unopened. The kettle whistled again by noon. I poured the water over dried lemon peel and mint leaves, letting the steam rise toward my face. No one would drink it but me. No one needed to ask if I wanted sugar. I walked to the porch. The scarf hung behind me like something half-remembered. I took the chair by the window and felt the wood creak beneath me without apology. I didn't reread the letter. I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't explain why I hadn't responded. I let the air move through the cabin the way it wanted. Some mornings don't need witnesses, only breath and warmth and a seat in your own quiet.